The Keller family had always been respected in Oak Ridge. Their hardware store stood on Main Street for 3 generations, a testament to hard work and community service. Thomas Keller, the patriarch, had built the business from a small shop into a local institution. His 2 sons, Michael and David, had grown up sweeping floors and stocking shelves, learning the trade that would one day be theirs. But fathers don't live forever, and on a crisp autumn morning, Thomas passed away in his sleep. The town mourned. The funeral was well attended, with people lining up to share stories about how Thomas had helped them through tough times with store credit or advice on home repairs. Michael, the older brother by 4 years, stood stoic beside his wife, Emma. At 42, he had the weathered hands of someone who'd spent decades handling tools and lumber. He'd worked alongside his father since dropping out of college, when he realized books interested him less than building things. The store was his life, his identity. Everyone assumed he would take over. David hung back during the reception, uncomfortable in his suit. He'd left Oak Ridge 15 years ago for Boston, where he became an accountant. His visits home had grown infrequent over the years, usually just Christmas and the occasional birthday. His wife, Sarah, squeezed his hand as they accepted condolences from people who barely remembered him. "It's good you're home," Mrs. Peterson, their old neighbor, told David. "Your father always said the store should stay in the family." David nodded politely, though the comment stung. He'd chosen a different path, but that didn't mean he'd abandoned his family. He'd offered to help with the store's finances, to modernize their systems, but his father had always declined. "The old ways work fine," Thomas would say, and that would be the end of it. The brothers barely spoke at the funeral. There was too much history between them, too many years of distance and resentment. Michael had never forgiven David for leaving, for choosing numbers over nails. And David had never forgotten how his father and brother had dismissed his suggestions, treating him like an outsider rather than family. 3 days after the funeral, they met at Patricia Wilson's law office. Patricia had been the Keller family's attorney for decades, handling everything from property purchases to minor legal troubles. Her office smelled of coffee and old books, with diplomas and family photos covering the walls. "Thank you both for coming," Patricia said, gesturing for them to sit. "I know this is a difficult time." Michael and David sat on opposite sides of her desk, neither looking at the other. "I'll get right to it," Patricia continued, opening a folder. "Your father's will is straightforward in most respects. The house goes to both of you equally. The car goes to Michael. Personal effects are to be divided amicably." She paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. "As for Keller Hardware, Thomas left specific instructions." She looked at both brothers. "The store is to be owned and operated jointly by both of you, with equal shares and equal say in all business decisions." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael broke it first. "That's impossible. I've been running that store with Dad for 20 years. David hasn't set foot in it except to buy a hammer once on Christmas Eve." "That's not fair," David shot back. "I offered to help countless times. Dad always said no." Patricia raised a hand. "Your father was very clear about this. He believed the store would benefit from both your talents, Michael's practical experience and David's financial acumen. So I'm supposed to uproot my life in Boston and move back here?" David asked, incredulous. "Not necessarily," Patricia explained. "The will doesn't stipulate that you both must work there daily, only that major decisions require mutual agreement." Michael stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous. David doesn't know the first thing about hardware or our customers." "I know how to turn a profit and modernize an outdated business," David countered, standing as well. "The store's been losing money for years. Did you know that?" "Of course not, because you and Dad refused to look at the numbers." Michael's face reddened. "We provide a service to this community. Not everything is about maximizing profit." "It is if you want to stay in business," David said. Patricia intervened before the argument could escalate further. "Gentlemen, please. Your father wanted you to work together. He believed in both of you." "Then he was delusional," Michael muttered, grabbing his jacket. "I'm not sharing control with someone who abandoned the family business." "I didn't abandon anything," David insisted. "I made my own choices instead of following the path laid out for me." Patricia sighed. "There's one more thing. The will includes a condition. If you can't come to an agreement within 6 months, the store must be sold, with proceeds divided equally." That stopped them both cold. "Sold?" Michael echoed. the color draining from his face. To strangers? That can't be right, David said. Dad would never want that. He wanted you two to find a way to work together, Patricia explained. This was his way of ensuring you'd at least try. The brothers looked at each other, really looked, for the first time since the funeral. In Michael's eyes, David saw the weight of responsibility his brother had carried all these years. In David's, Michael recognized the hurt of someone who had never felt fully accepted. 6 months, Michael finally said, to figure out if we can run a business together without killing each other. Or we lose everything Dad built, David added quietly. Neither liked the terms, but neither was willing to give up their share either. As they left the lawyer's office, the autumn wind scattered leaves across the sidewalk. The Keller brothers walked in different directions, each wondering how they could possibly bridge 15 years of estrangement to save their father's legacy. The next morning, David arrived at Keller Hardware before opening. He found Michael already there, updating price tags. I thought we could go through the inventory system first, David said awkwardly, holding up his laptop. See where we stand. Michael looked up, his expression guarded. Fine, but then I need to show you how we organize the special orders. Dad had a system. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a start. 3 weeks into their reluctant partnership, the Keller brothers had established an uneasy routine. Michael handled the day-to-day operations, while David spent evenings poring over financial records, looking for ways to cut costs and increase revenue. They communicated mostly through notes left on the office desk or brief, tense exchanges when their schedules overlapped. The store itself seemed to sense the discord. The usually warm atmosphere had chilled, with employees tiptoeing around the brothers, unsure whose instructions to follow when they conflicted. Jenny Martinez, who'd worked the register for almost a decade, found herself caught in the middle one Tuesday morning when a shipment of premium power tools arrived. Michael said to display them by the front window, she told David, who was examining the invoice with a frown. Said they'd catch people's eye from the street. These cost us nearly double our regular line, David replied, tapping his calculator. We need to mark them up significantly. Putting them front and center sends the wrong message about our overall pricing. Jenny shifted uncomfortably. So, where should I put them? David sighed. Just wait until I talk to Michael. That conversation, like most between them, quickly heated up. We've always showcased new inventory up front, Michael insisted, crossing his arms as they stood in the cramped back office. Dad taught us that 15 years ago, or maybe you've forgotten. What I remember, David countered, is a business model from the 1980s that doesn't work in today's market. We're competing with big box stores and online retailers now. Our customers come here because we're not those places, Michael shot back. They want expertise and quality, not rock-bottom prices. They also don't want to pay twice what something costs on Amazon. The argument ended like most of them, with neither brother giving ground and the employees caught in the fallout. The tools went in the front window, but David insisted on more modest pricing than Michael wanted. At home, their personal lives felt the strain. Michael's wife Emma tried to stay neutral, but her loyalty to her husband was clear. He works so hard, she told her sister on the phone, voice lowered though Michael was out in the garage. 60 hours a week for years, and now David waltzes in thinking he knows better because he has some fancy degree. In Boston, Sarah watched David grow more frustrated with each video call to Oakridge. Maybe this was a mistake, he told her late one night. Maybe we should just sell the damn store. Is that what you want? She asked. To give up your family's legacy? David didn't have an answer. The situation came to a head in the 4th week when David implemented a new inventory tracking system without fully explaining it to the staff. Michael arrived to find confused employees and missing items that had simply been relocated to match the new organizational scheme. You can't just change things overnight, he shouted, slamming David's laptop closed. These people have worked here for years. They have systems they understand. Inefficient systems, David argued. We're wasting hours every week on manual tasks that could be automated. And what happens when the internet goes down? Or when Mrs. Henderson comes in looking for that special paint she always gets, but now nobody can find it because it's been moved to match your precious spreadsheet. David's patience snapped. This isn't about spreadsheets. It's about survival. The store lost money 3 of the last 5 years. Did you know that? At this rate, there won't be a Keller Hardware for Mrs. Henderson to visit, special paint or not. The revelation hung in the air between them. Michael's anger deflated, replaced by confusion. "That can't be right," he said, quieter now. "We've always made enough to get by." "Getting by isn't sustainable," David replied, opening his laptop again and pulling up a chart. "Look, these are our profits over the last decade. See the trend?" Michael studied the screen, his expression darkening. "Dad never said anything about this. Would you have listened if he had? Or would you have dismissed it like you dismiss everything I say?" The question struck a nerve. Michael straightened up, defensive again. "I listen to things that make sense. You coming in here after 15 years away, telling us we've been doing everything wrong. I never said that," David interrupted. "But we need to adapt. The world didn't stop changing because Keller Hardware decided to ignore progress." Their argument drew attention. Through the office window, they could see employees and even a few customers glancing toward the commotion. Both brothers fell silent, aware they were undermining the very business they were fighting over. That evening, after closing, Michael stayed late. He pulled out the old ledgers his father had kept, comparing them with the digital reports David had created. The numbers didn't lie. The store had been slowly declining for years, cushioned by Thomas's personal savings, which he'd quietly been investing back into the business. When David arrived the next morning, he found Michael already there, dark circles under his eyes. "You were right about the numbers," Michael admitted grudgingly. "But that doesn't mean you're right about everything else." It wasn't much of an olive branch, but David recognized it as significant coming from his stubborn older brother. "I know I'm not," he conceded. "I don't understand the customers like you do, or the community." They stared at each other, two men more similar than either would admit, both stubborn, both proud, both unwilling to be the first to truly back down. The stalemate might have continued indefinitely had Jenny not interrupted with news that would force them to work together or lose everything. Bosses," she called from the door. "You might want to see this." She handed them a flyer announcing that Homestead Supply, a regional chain, would be opening a new superstore just outside Oak Ridge city limits in 2 months. "They're offering opening discounts of 30% across the board," Jenny said. "And they're hiring. 3 of our part-timers already asked me if I knew what our future plans were." The brothers exchanged a look that, for the first time, contained more concern than anger. "We need to talk," Michael said. "Really talk." That night, they stayed after closing, sitting at the old wooden desk their father had used for decades. They ordered pizza, and for the first time since Thomas's funeral, they shared a meal. "We can't compete with their prices," David said, studying the Homestead Supply promotional materials. "No," Michael agreed. "But we have something they don't." "What's that?" "History. Relationships. When Bill Turner's basement flooded at 2 a.m. last winter, he didn't call a superstore. He called Dad, who called me. I was there in 20 minutes with pumps and advice." David nodded slowly. "Customer service. Expertise." "Exactly." But Michael hesitated. "But you're right that we need to modernize too. I just don't want to lose what makes us special in the process." For the first time, each brother seemed to truly hear the other. They talked late into the night, the conversation occasionally growing heated but never devolving into the shouting matches that had become routine. By the time they locked up, they had the beginnings of a plan, one that would require both Michael's deep community connections and David's financial expertise. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Michael paused. "Dad knew what he was doing, didn't he? With the will." David looked up at the faded Keller Hardware sign, illuminated by a single spotlight. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think he did." They weren't friends yet, not even close. But they were partners, finally beginning to act like it. The real test would come in the morning, when they would have to present a united front to their nervous staff, and in the months ahead, as they fought to save the store that, despite everything, still mattered deeply to them both. The news about Homestead Supply spread through Oak Ridge like wildfire. By the end of the week, the Keller brothers had fielded dozens of questions from concerned customers and anxious employees. For once, they presented a united front, assuring everyone that Keller Hardware wasn't going anywhere. Behind closed doors, though, the pressure mounted. "We have less than 2 months," David said during their morning meeting. He'd taken to arriving early, brewing coffee for both of them, a small gesture that hadn't gone unnoticed by Michael. "Their grand opening is October 15th. Michael nodded, studying the calendar on the wall. "Historically, fall is already our slowest season. People finish their summer projects and wait until spring to start new ones. Except for the holiday rush, David pointed out. True. Christmas lights, gift tools, snow shovels if we're lucky with the weather. This was how they worked now, still cautious around each other, but trading information rather than barbs. Progress, however slight. Their plan took shape gradually. They would focus on what the superstore couldn't offer: personalized service, repair work, and community involvement. Michael suggested hosting weekend workshops on basic home repairs, while David worked on a loyalty program that would reward repeat customers. We should renovate too, David proposed during their third planning session. Nothing major, but update the lighting, rearrange the layout to feel more modern. Michael's knee-jerk reaction was resistance. The store had looked the same for decades, but he caught himself. Dad always said good lighting sells merchandise. Let's look at options. Small compromises accumulated. Michael agreed to the new inventory system, but insisted on training sessions for all staff. David pushed for expanded hours, but accepted that they couldn't afford the additional payroll yet. They found middle ground more often than not, each secretly surprised by the other's occasional flexibility. The renovation began on a Monday morning in mid-September. The store would remain open, with sections cordoned off as work progressed. David had found a local contractor offering a fair price, one of Michael's former high school classmates, it turned out. Ryan Gonzalez? Michael said when David showed him the quote. We played baseball together. Didn't know he'd started his own business. His references are solid, David replied. And he can start right away. The coincidence underscored what each brother brought to the table. David's business acumen saved them money, while Michael's community connections ensured quality work from people invested in seeing a local institution thrive. The renovation revealed unexpected complications. Behind an old display wall, they discovered water damage from a long-forgotten leak. The electrical system needed more extensive updating than anticipated. Each problem ate into their limited budget. We can push back the loyalty program launch, David suggested reluctantly after calculating the additional costs. Focus on the essential upgrades first. Michael was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. No, we need both. I might have another solution. That weekend, Michael made calls to longtime customers who owned local businesses. The dentist who'd bought all his office cabinets from Keller Hardware, the restaurant owner whose kitchen they'd helped remodel, the principal whose school maintenance supplies came exclusively from them. By Monday, they had promises of advance purchases, prepaid maintenance contracts, and even a few small loans from people eager to see the store succeed against corporate competition. I can't believe they just offered to help, David said, reviewing the commitments Michael had secured. It's not charity, Michael explained. It's community. Dad built these relationships over decades. They know we'll be here when they need us because we always have been. The lesson wasn't lost on David. Spreadsheets could track inventory and profit margins, but they couldn't measure the value of a handshake agreement built on 30 years of trust. The brothers' wives noticed the change in dynamics before they did. Emma invited David and Sarah for dinner one Sunday, their first social gathering since the funeral. Michael actually mentioned looking forward to seeing you, Emma told Sarah while they prepared dessert. A month ago, I wasn't sure they'd ever speak civilly again. Sarah nodded. David's been different too, less frustrated. He started talking about maybe spending more time in Oak Ridge, even after this crisis passes. In the living room, the brothers discussed business, but also found themselves reminiscing about their father. Remember when he caught us trying to build that treehouse using lumber from the store? Michael asked, smiling at the memory. And instead of punishing us, he showed us how to properly measure and cut, David added. Said if we were going to steal his wood, we should at least build something that wouldn't collapse. They laughed, the sound surprising them both. As September rolled into October, the renovation neared completion. The new lighting brightened the space dramatically. Wider aisles and logical product groupings made the store feel more spacious and shopper-friendly. A small coffee station near the register invited customers to linger and chat, Michael's idea, drawing on the store's social role in the community. The digital upgrades happened in parallel. A proper website featuring inventory checking and special order capabilities. A social media presence highlighting project ideas and seasonal tips. A text message system for notifying customers when orders arrived. It's still Keller Hardware, Michael said with wonder as they surveyed the changes. Just better. The true test came in the second week of October, when Homestead Supply held a pre-opening event for local media. Their glossy flyers appeared on every doorstep in Oak Ridge, advertising deep discounts and a massive selection. David and Michael stood outside their own store, looking at the flyer. "Their power tools section is bigger than our entire square footage," David said. "And their staff won't know the difference between drywall screws and wood screws," Michael countered. "But we still need to respond." They decided on a community appreciation weekend, scheduled just days before Homestead's grand opening. Sales and raffles would draw people in, but the brothers bet on personal connections to keep them coming back. The Friday night before their big weekend, they stayed late finalizing preparations. Michael hung the banner while David updated the website. The renovated store gleamed around them, familiar yet refreshed. "Do you think it's enough?" David asked when they finished, voicing the doubt that had lingered since they'd first seen the Homestead flyer. Michael considered the question carefully. "I don't know, but I do know we've done everything we could. Together." The word hung between them, weighted with the journey of the past months. "I should have come back more," David said suddenly. "After I left for college. Should have stayed more connected." Michael leaned against the counter. "And I should have visited you in Boston. Met Sarah before the wedding. Seen your life there." "Why didn't we?" David asked, though he suspected they both knew the answer. "Stubbornness," Michael said. "Dad's worst trait. We both inherited it." David smiled slightly, along with his work ethic, and his terrible handwriting, and his love for this place, David added, gesturing around the store. Michael nodded. "He'd be proud, you know, not just of saving the store, of us figuring out how to work together." It was the closest they'd come to addressing the rift that had grown between them over the years. Not just geographical distance, but the emotional chasm that had widened with each passing year of silence. As they locked up that night, something had shifted. The combative energy that had characterized their early interactions had transformed into something productive, even complimentary. They weren't just reluctant business partners anymore. They were brothers again, rediscovering the bond that had been buried under years of resentment and misunderstanding. The community appreciation weekend arrived with perfect fall weather, crisp mornings giving way to sunny afternoons. Customers filled the store, many exclaiming over the renovations while still finding their favorite sections right where they expected them. Michael moved through the crowd with ease, greeting people by name, asking about families and projects. David worked the register alongside Jenny, processing sales efficiently while collecting email addresses for their new newsletter. By Sunday evening, they had exceeded their sales projections by nearly 30%. More importantly, they'd signed up over 200 loyal customers for their new program and booked 6 community workshops for the coming months. As they counted the day's receipts, exhausted but satisfied, a customer they didn't recognize wandered in just before closing. The man wore a Homestead Supply polo shirt, barely concealed under his jacket. "Just checking out the competition," he explained with a slightly embarrassed smile when Michael approached him. "I'm the new assistant manager over there. Wanted to see what we're up against." Rather than showing irritation, Michael gave him a tour, pointing out features of the newly renovated space. David watched with surprise, then understanding. This wasn't just confidence, it was pride. "You know," the man said as he left, "they told us this place would probably close within the year after we opened. But I'm not so sure now." After he departed, the brothers exchanged a look. "They underestimated us," Michael said. "They underestimated Oak Ridge," David corrected him, "and what this store means to the town." As they turned off the lights and set the alarm, a sense of cautious optimism replaced the anxiety that had driven them for months. Homestead Supply would open its doors in 3 days. The competition would be fierce. The future remained uncertain. But whatever came next, they would face it as they should have faced everything since their father first taught them to stock shelves together, as brothers, with their complementary strengths and shared heritage. That, more than any business strategy, was Thomas Keller's true legacy. Homestead Supply's grand opening arrived with all the fanfare a corporate budget could buy. Balloons arched over the entrance. A local radio station broadcast live from the parking lot. Free hot dogs and sodas drew families who wandered the massive aisles, carts filled with discounted merchandise. From across town, Michael and David watched their parking lot empty by mid-morning as curiosity pulled even loyal customers toward the spectacle. The brothers had anticipated this, had warned their staff, but the reality still stung. It's just the novelty, Jenny assured them as she straightened an already perfect display. They'll be back. David nodded, but doubt nagged at him. The spreadsheets projected a 30% drop in revenue for the first month after Homestead's opening. They could weather it, barely, but the margin for error was slim. Michael disappeared into the back office around noon, and David found him staring at old photographs their father had kept on the wall. Thomas as a young man, standing proudly in front of the store on opening day. Thomas with Michael at his high school graduation, both in suits, the store visible in the background. Thomas showing a young David how to use a cash register, the boy barely tall enough to see over the counter. "We've never been the biggest or the cheapest," Michael said without turning around. That wasn't Dad's vision. David leaned against the doorframe. No, he wanted to build something that would last. The afternoon brought a trickle of customers, mostly older folks who valued routine over novelty. The brothers helped each one personally, taking time to answer questions and offer advice. By closing time, they'd made less than half their usual daily sales. "Day one," David said as they locked up. "We knew this would happen." Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "She's inviting us over for dinner." Sarah too. The invitation felt like a lifeline after a draining day. At Michael's modest two-story house, Emma had prepared comfort food, lasagna, garlic bread, and apple pie. Sarah, who'd extended her visit to help with the appreciation weekend, set the table while the brothers washed up. "I drove past Homestead on my way here," Sarah mentioned as they settled around the dining table. Their parking lot was still packed. Emma shot her a look, but David smiled reassuringly. "We're playing the long game. Those opening discounts won't last forever." Michael nodded, passing the salad bowl. "And neither will their staff's patience for helping Mrs. Henderson find the exact shade of blue she needs for her guest bathroom trim." The conversation shifted to childhood memories and shared stories about Thomas. The tension of the day gradually eased. After dinner, while the women cleared plates, Michael led David to the garage where he'd set up a small woodworking shop. "I didn't know you still did this," David said, running his hand over a half-finished bookcase. "Not as much as I'd like," Michael admitted. "Started again after Dad got sick. Reminded me of when he used to teach us." David picked up a chisel, feeling its weight. "You were always better at it. I just liked the math, calculating board feet, figuring angles. You designed, I built. We were a good team back then." The simple acknowledgement hung between them, a recognition of something lost and perhaps, now, partially recovered. In the weeks that followed, Homestead's impact proved both better and worse than expected. Their overall sales dropped as predicted, but their workshop program flourished beyond expectations. Every Saturday morning, the rear of the store transformed into a classroom where Michael taught everything from basic plumbing repairs to custom shelving installation. David, to his own surprise, found himself assisting more often than not. His organizational skills complemented Michael's hands-on knowledge, and customers responded to their dynamic. Workshop participants inevitably purchased supplies afterward, softening the financial blow of Homestead's arrival. The loyalty program showed promise too. Regulars appreciated the personalized discounts and the newsletter David created, featuring project ideas and maintenance tips specific to Oak Ridge's climate and housing stock. 6 weeks after Homestead's opening, David received an unexpected call from his firm in Boston. His leave of absence was ending, and they wanted to know his plans. The question caught him off guard. He'd been so focused on the store that he'd barely thought about his accounting career. That evening, he found Michael in the workshop area, designing a display for their upcoming holiday season push. "Need your opinion on something," David said, pulling up a chair. "It's about Boston." Michael set down his pencil. "They want you back. Month-end close is coming up. I've got clients expecting me. So when do you leave?" Michael's tone was carefully neutral. "That's the thing," David replied. "I'm not sure I want to." The admission surprised them both. David had spent 15 years building his career, establishing himself in a city he loved. Yet the past months in Oak Ridge had shifted something fundamental. The store wasn't just a business to save anymore. It had become a reconnection to his roots. "What does Sarah think?" Michael asked. "She's been working remotely already. Says she could do it from here too, at least part-time." David hesitated. "But this has to work for both of us. I know I came in with all these changes and ideas. That saved us." Michael interrupted. "Look, I was wrong to fight you on the modernization. We needed both approaches to survive. David smiled slightly. Dad knew that. It's why he left it to both of us. The conversation extended past closing time, the brothers discussing options neither would have considered months earlier. Maybe David could split his time between Boston and Oak Ridge. Maybe they could expand their online presence to supplement in-store sales. Maybe the workshops could grow into a broader education program. As November turned cold, holiday preparations began in earnest. Keller Hardware had always gone all out for Christmas, and this year would be no exception. Michael climbed ladders to hang garlands while David negotiated with suppliers for competitive pricing on popular gift items. The store's first major test against Homestead came the day after Thanksgiving. Black Friday had never been huge for hardware stores, but this year they'd planned carefully, offering targeted deals that showcased their strengths rather than trying to match the big box discounts across the board. Professional-grade tools at 20% off, David explained to their staff during the pre-opening meeting. Gift sets for DIY enthusiasts. Custom gift baskets that people can tailor for hard-to-shop-for relatives. Michael added, and free gift wrapping. Try getting that at Homestead. By mid-morning, the store hummed with activity. Michael's community connections had paid off, with local business owners making a point of shopping there. David's marketing had drawn in new customers, many expressing surprise at the renovated space and expanded offerings. At the register, the brothers worked side by side for the first time since childhood, one ringing up purchases while the other wrapped gifts in paper featuring the Keller Hardware logo. We're up 15% from last year's Black Friday, David announced when they finally locked the doors that evening. Michael grinned. And Homestead doesn't know how to do Christmas in Oak Ridge. The coming weeks proved him right. The superstore offered lower prices on many items, but Keller Hardware provided the experience, from helping customers select the right gifts to explaining installation processes to delivering large items personally when necessary. 2 weeks before Christmas, a snowstorm hit Oak Ridge unexpectedly, dumping 8 inches overnight. The store's phones started ringing at dawn. Snow shovels, ice melt, generators, insulation, Jenny reported after fielding a dozen calls. The usual winter panic shopping. Michael frowned. We're low on shovels after that early run last month. David checked their inventory system. Homestead probably has hundreds. They braced for a difficult day, knowing they couldn't compete on quantity. But as customers arrived, shaking snow from their boots, something unexpected happened. They came not just for supplies, but for advice. My pipes always freeze in this corner, Mr. Peterson explained, pointing to a rough sketch of his basement. What am I doing wrong? Our backup generator won't start, Mrs. Tyson said. And my husband's away on business. Michael dispatched their part-time handyman to check Mrs. Tyson's generator while David helped Mr. Peterson select pipe insulation and explain proper installation. Throughout the day, they addressed one crisis after another, sometimes sending customers to Homestead when necessary items were out of stock, but always providing the knowledge that made those purchases effective. That evening, as they tallied receipts that exceeded expectations despite limited inventory, Michael laughed suddenly. What? David asked. Dad used to say snowstorms were when we earned our reputation. Anyone can sell a shovel, he'd say. We sell peace of mind. David nodded, understanding flowing between them. That's what we're really competing on, isn't it? Not price or selection. Never was. People come to us when they need more than just a thing. They need to know how to use it, why it matters, what happens if they get it wrong. The realization crystallized what they'd been working toward since Thomas's death. Keller Hardware wasn't just a store. It was a resource, a community institution built on relationships as much as retail. As Christmas approached, bringing with it the end of their 6-month deadline to work together or sell, neither brother mentioned the lawyer's office or Patricia Wilson. The choice had been made not in a single moment, but in 1,000 small decisions, compromises, and shared victories. On Christmas Eve, they closed early as always, a tradition their father had maintained to let staff enjoy family celebrations. As they dimmed the lights, leaving only the window displays illuminated for passers-by, David paused by the register. I called my firm yesterday, he said. Worked out an arrangement. I'll consult remotely, go back quarterly for in-person meetings. Michael looked at him, surprised. You're staying? We're not done here, David replied simply. There's more to build. Outside, snow began to fall again, dusting the old sign that still bore their father's name alongside their own. 2 brothers, different in almost every way, united by the legacy they'd nearly lost and now, together, would preserve. Spring arrived in Oak Ridge with the familiar rhythm of home improvement season. Garden supplies replaced snow shovels in the front displays. The weekend workshops shifted focus to outdoor projects. And with the change in seasons came unexpected news that would test the brothers' newfound partnership. David was updating their financial projections one April morning when Michael burst into the office, face flushed with anger. He slapped a letter onto the desk. "The city council approved a rezoning request," he said. "Guess who's planning to build luxury condos on the vacant lot across the street?" David scanned the document. Westbrook Development? Never heard of them. Local front for a Chicago investment group. Emma's cousin works in the planning department. Michael paced the small office. 4-story building with first-floor retail. They're calling it revitalization. The implications weren't lost on David. Construction would disrupt access to their store for months. Parking would become a nightmare. And once completed, the condos would bring wealthier residents who might prefer sleek boutiques over traditional hardware. "We survived Homestead," David said, though uncertainty tinged his voice. "Barely. Our margins are still tight." Michael ran a hand through his graying hair. "And Homestead at least brings people who need hardware. This is different." The brothers attended the next city council meeting, where the development was presented with glossy renderings and promises of tax revenue. Michael spoke during public comment, raising concerns about construction impact on established businesses. Several other Main Street merchants echoed his worries. Councilwoman Diaz, who'd known Thomas for decades, approached them after the vote. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It was 4-3. Not much I could do." "Will they at least maintain access to our block during construction?" David asked. "They're required to, but you know how these projects go." She sighed. "Progress, they call it." Progress. The word that had once divided the brothers now united them in concern. On the drive back to the store, they brainstormed options. "We could approach the developers directly," David suggested. "See if there's room for compromise on the construction timeline." Michael nodded, his initial anger cooling into strategic thinking. "And maybe consider the retail opportunity. If we can't beat them, you want to move the store into their building?" David asked, surprised. "Not necessarily, but it's worth exploring what that space could offer us. Maybe a smaller, specialized location focusing on upscale home goods. Complement the main store rather than replace it." David smiled. 6 months ago, Michael would have rejected any change to the business model. Now he was proposing expansion. Their meeting with Westbrook's representative, a polished woman named Vanessa Chun, went better than expected. She seemed genuinely interested in preserving local businesses while advancing the development. "Our investors recognize the value of Oak Ridge's charm," she explained in her sleek downtown office. "Cookie-cutter gentrification isn't our goal. We want to enhance what's already working." Michael remained skeptical, but David saw opportunity. "What if we proposed a partnership? Keller Hardware could supply materials for the unit's final touches. Fixtures, cabinet hardware, custom shelving, plus ongoing maintenance supplies for the building." Chen's interest was piqued. "Our contractors usually handle procurement, but for finishing elements." She made a note. "Would you have a showroom where buyers could select custom options?" The question sparked an idea that would evolve over the following weeks. What if Keller Hardware created a design center within the development? A place where condo owners and other Oak Ridge residents could plan renovations with professional guidance, then purchase both materials and expertise from the main store? "It's essentially formalizing what we already do informally," David explained to Michael as they refined the concept. "Instead of helping people piece together projects at the counter, we create a dedicated space with samples, catalogs, and appointment-based consultation." Michael saw the potential but worried about spreading themselves too thin. Who would run it? "We're already working 60-hour weeks." The answer came unexpectedly from Sarah during Sunday dinner at Michael and Emma's. "I could," she offered. "My interior design background would be perfect for this." All eyes turned to her. David looked particularly surprised. "But your firm in Boston." "I've been remote for months now," she reminded him. "And to be honest, corporate design isn't what I imagined doing with my degree. This would be more creative, more personal." The possibility of Sarah becoming more permanently involved in Oak Ridge shifted the family dynamics yet again. Emma, who had initially been cool toward David's wife, found common ground as they discussed the design center concept. The two women spent hours sketching layouts and considering material samples. For David, Sarah's interest represented another anchor securing him to his hometown. What had begun as a reluctant 6-month obligation was evolving into a family enterprise spanning 2 generations. But just as their plans gained momentum, Westbrook Development hit financial troubles. The investment group behind the project pulled funding, citing market concerns. Construction halted with only the foundation completed, leaving an eyesore of concrete and steel directly across from Keller Hardware. Now what? Michael asked as they stared at the abandoned site from their front window. We based our expansion plans on their timeline. David considered the situation. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise. We were rushing into something without fully thinking it through. The brothers decided to pause the design center plans, but continue developing the concept. Sarah began creating a portfolio of services they could offer, starting with a scaled-down version within the existing store. They cleared a corner near the paint department, installed better lighting, and set up a consultation table with material samples and catalogs. Word spread through Oak Ridge about the new service. Homeowners planning renovations booked appointments to discuss projects with Sarah, who then connected them with Michael for technical guidance and David for budgeting advice. The family approach resonated with customers seeking personalized attention. By midsummer, the modest design corner was generating significant revenue through project sales. More importantly, it brought in a different clientele, younger homeowners who might otherwise have shopped exclusively at bigger stores. The abandoned development site remained a concern, but the city eventually forced Westbrook to secure and beautify the area while seeking new investors. The brothers worked with other Main Street businesses to create a pop-up marketplace in the adjacent parking lot, drawing weekend traffic despite the construction eyesore. As the 1-year anniversary of Thomas's death approached, the brothers found themselves in a reflective mood. They closed the store early one evening and visited their father's grave, bringing a small woodworking project they'd completed together, a replica of the original Keller Hardware sign. He'd be proud, Michael said as they placed it against the headstone. Not just of the store, but of us. David nodded. I was so angry with him for forcing us together with that will. But he knew what he was doing. He always played the long game. Michael brushed leaves from the grave marker. Remember how he'd let us make mistakes on projects? Never stepped in too early. Because we learn more that way, David finished. We had to figure it out ourselves. The lesson resonated beyond childhood carpentry. Thomas had given them one final challenge, each other, knowing they'd either overcome it together or fail separately. That evening, they met with Patricia Wilson to formally dissolve the 6-month selling provision in the will. The store would remain under their joint ownership indefinitely, a partnership that had evolved from obligation to choice. Your father would be pleased, Patricia said as they signed the papers. Though not surprised, I think. He had faith in both of you. Michael's phone buzzed during the meeting, a text from Emma that couldn't wait. He read it twice, expression changing from confusion to shock. What is it? David asked as they left the lawyer's office. Michael handed him the phone. The message was simple. Westbrook property sold. New owner wants to meet with you tomorrow. The brothers exchanged concerned looks. Another developer, another battle for Main Street's character. But they faced it with a unity unimaginable a year earlier. The meeting was set for 10 the next morning. They arrived early, prepared with questions about construction timelines and access guarantees. But the person waiting in their office wasn't another corporate representative. It was Ryan Gonzalez, the contractor who had renovated their store. Sorry for the mystery, Ryan said, grinning at their confused expressions. Wanted to be sure before I said anything. Michael found his voice first. You bought the development site? Ryan nodded. With partners. Local ones. We've been watching that Chicago group make a mess of things and decided Oak Ridge deserves better. David leaned forward. What are you planning to build? Something that actually fits this town. 3 stories instead of 4. Mixed residential and commercial, but affordable units for teachers, firefighters, people who actually work here. Ryan spread revised blueprints across their desk. And we want Keller Hardware as our anchor tenant for the retail space. The brothers studied the plans, which included an ample showroom area perfect for the design center they'd envisioned. We'd maintain your existing store, of course, Ryan continued. But this gives you that expansion opportunity without leaving Main Street. The proposal represented everything they'd hoped for: growth without abandoning tradition, progress that honored the past. It was exactly the balance they'd been striving to achieve in their partnership. "We'll need to run the numbers," David said, professional instincts kicking in despite his excitement. Michael nodded. "And talk with Sarah about the design requirements." Ryan smiled, recognizing the careful consideration that had replaced the brothers' once impulsive decision-making. "Take your time. This is a hometown project. We're building for the long haul." As Ryan left, the brothers remained at the desk, studying the blueprints that represented not just an expansion of their business, but a new chapter for their family legacy. "Dad always said opportunity knocks when you least expect it," Michael remarked. David smiled. "But usually only if you've prepared the door." Construction began on the new development that fall, proceeding with the consideration that only locals could provide. Ryan's crew worked during off-peak hours when possible. They maintained clean walkways to Keller Hardware and the neighboring businesses. Most importantly, they communicated every step of the way, giving the brothers advance notice of particularly disruptive phases. The design center planning accelerated as the new space took shape. Sarah recruited an architecture student from the community college as a part-time assistant. Emma, whose administrative skills had been honed through years of school volunteer work, offered to handle scheduling and client management. What had begun as the brothers' reluctant partnership was evolving into a true family business. "We'll need to update our business structure," David pointed out one evening as they reviewed Sarah's latest design concept. "The current LLC doesn't account for profit sharing beyond the two of us." Michael nodded, studying the organizational chart David had drafted. "Family shares? Or do we treat the design center as a separate entity?" "I was thinking both, actually. Core business remains ours, with provisions for eventual succession. New ventures like the design center could have more flexible ownership based on who's driving them." The conversation would have been unimaginable 18 months earlier, when they'd barely been able to agree on inventory management. Now they were planning for a future that extended beyond themselves, considering how the business might sustain the next generation. Winter arrived with heavy snow and strong holiday sales. The brothers had built on the previous year's success with an expanded workshop program focusing on handmade gifts. Every Saturday in November and December, the back of the store hosted parents and children creating custom toolboxes, birdhouses, and garden markers. Each project drove material sales while cementing Keller Hardware's role as more than just a retail outlet. Homestead Supply remained a formidable competitor, but the brothers had stopped obsessing over the superstore's pricing and promotions. They'd found their niche in the ecosystem of Oak Ridge commerce, not the cheapest or the biggest, but the most connected to the community's needs. The design center construction proceeded through winter into early spring. Sarah spent hours on site, working with the contractors to ensure every detail matched her vision. David occasionally caught her staring at the space with an expression of wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe this opportunity had emerged from what had initially seemed like a family obligation. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked her one evening as they drove home from a particularly long day. "Leaving Boston, your firm, our life there?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I miss certain things. The museums. Our favorite restaurant on Newberry Street." She smiled. "But I don't regret the change. What we're building here feels more meaningful." The sentiment echoed David's own experience. The accounting career he'd been so reluctant to pause had receded in importance compared to the legacy he and Michael were now actively shaping. His quarterly trips to Boston felt increasingly like visits to a former life rather than maintaining a current one. As the design center's grand opening approached, a letter arrived from an unexpected source. Patricia Wilson called the brothers to her office, where she handed them an envelope with their father's handwriting. "Thomas left this with instructions to give it to you after the store had been under your joint management for 18 months, she explained. He was very specific about the timing. The brothers exchanged puzzled looks. Patricia excused herself to give them privacy, and Michael carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, dated shortly before their father's death. "Michael and David, if you're reading this, you've done what I hoped, found a way to work together despite your differences. The 6-month deadline in my will was never about selling the store. It was about forcing you both to confront what you'd been avoiding for 15 years, each other. Michael, you needed David's vision to move forward. David, you needed Michael's foundation to build upon. Neither of you could see that while I was alive because you were too busy trying to prove yourselves to me in different ways. I'm sorry for the manipulation, but not for the outcome. Family businesses only survive when family comes first. The store was never just about hardware. It was about creating something that would keep you connected even when life pulled you in different directions. Whatever you've built by now, I'm proud of it. Not because of profit margins or modernization or community standing, but because you built it together. Your father, Thomas. The brothers sat in silence after reading the letter, each processing their father's final message in their own way. He planned this, David finally said. All of it. Michael nodded slowly. The old man was always 3 steps ahead. Should we be angry about the manipulation? Michael considered this, then shook his head. Honestly, I needed the push. We both did. The letter's arrival coincided with final preparations for the design center's opening. The timing seemed fitting, their father's acknowledgement of their progress arriving just as they prepared to expand on the foundation he'd built. The grand opening drew a crowd that stretched down Main Street. Ryan and his development partners had coordinated the event to showcase not just the design center, but the entire building, now branded as Oak Ridge Commons. The mayor cut a ribbon. Local media covered the story as an example of thoughtful small-town development. Sarah led tours of the design center, her confidence growing with each group. The space was everything they'd envisioned, warm yet professional, with displays highlighting local materials alongside national brands. A central consultation table featured a built-in digital design system where clients could visualize projects before committing. In one corner, particularly meaningful to the brothers, stood a small exhibition about the history of Keller hardware. Photos of Thomas and the original store. The progression of signage over decades. Even childhood pictures of Michael and David working alongside their father. As the opening day crowd thinned, an elderly woman lingered by the historical display. The brothers approached her, recognizing Mrs. Henderson, their father's longtime customer with the exacting paint preferences. Your father would be pleased, she said, tapping a photo of Thomas from the 1980s. Though he'd pretend it was all too fancy for his taste. Michael smiled. He wasn't big on change. Oh, that's where you're wrong, Mrs. Henderson corrected gently. Thomas changed constantly, just quietly. When everyone switched to credit cards, he was ready. When computers became necessary, he learned. He just never made a fuss about it. Her observation shifted something in the brothers' understanding of their father. Perhaps the dichotomy they'd perceived, Michael as the traditionalist, David as the innovator, had been a misreading. Their father had embodied both qualities, adapting while maintaining core values. That evening, after the last guest departed, the extended family gathered in the design center for a private celebration. Emma brought champagne. Sarah had arranged catering from Oak Ridge's best restaurant. Jenny and other longtime employees joined them, the boundaries between staff and family long since blurred. Michael raised a glass. To Thomas Keller, who built the foundation. To new beginnings, Sarah added. To family, David finished, meeting his brother's eyes across the room. Later, as the brothers locked up together, they paused at the threshold between the new design center and the pathway leading back to the original store. We should update the name, Michael said suddenly. Keller Hardware doesn't really cover what we do anymore. David considered this. Keller Home Solutions? Keller Building and Design. Just Keller's, Michael suggested. Simple, flexible enough to cover whatever comes next. The simplicity appealed to them both, honoring tradition while leaving room for evolution. Like their partnership itself, the name acknowledged the past without being constrained by it. As spring turned to summer, the brothers settled into new rhythms. The design center flourished under Sarah's leadership, while the main store remained the community hub it had always been. Michael's workshops expanded to include advanced classes taught by local tradespeople. David developed a mentorship program with the high school, teaching business skills to students interested in entrepreneurship. They still disagreed sometimes, Michael preferring tried-and-true approaches, David pushing for innovation. But the arguments had transformed from power struggles into productive tension. They'd learned to trust each other's instincts, recognizing that their different perspectives strengthened the business rather than undermining it. One warm evening in late August, the brothers stayed after closing to finalize plans for a store-wide inventory update. Through the windows, They could see Oak Ridge Commons illuminated across the street, a physical manifestation of how much had changed in 2 years. "I got an offer from my old firm," David said as they finished. "Regional partner position. They'd let me stay based here, just travel quarterly." Michael looked up, expression carefully neutral. "Good opportunity. I turned it down yesterday." David closed his laptop. "Realized I don't need a backup plan anymore. This is where I want to be." Michael nodded, relief visible despite his attempt at casualness. "Good. Because I was thinking about that succession plan we discussed. If we're really building this for the long term." Their conversation continued past midnight, spanning practical details and larger visions. They talked about possible expansion to neighboring towns, scholarship programs in Thomas's name, community investment initiatives. They weren't just planning for a business anymore, but for a legacy. As they finally locked up, Michael paused at the door. "You know what Dad would say about all these plans?" David smiled. "Start with the foundation. And measure twice," Michael added. "Cut once." They finished together, a childhood lesson that had become much more than woodworking advice. Outside, Main Street was quiet except for distant laughter from the new cafe in Oak Ridge Commons. The original Keller Hardware sign, refurbished rather than replaced, caught the moonlight. Beneath it, a smaller edition they'd installed on the anniversary of taking over. EST 1978. Reimagined 2023. The brothers walked to their cars, no longer strangers forced together by circumstance, but partners who had chosen their shared path. The hardware store that had nearly divided them had ultimately rebuilt something more valuable than retail success. The family bonds their father had hoped would endure beyond him. As David started his engine, he glanced once more at the storefront, seeing not just the present business, but all its incarnations. His father's original vision, the struggling store they'd inherited, the revitalized enterprise they'd created together, and the community institution it would continue to become. The journey had come full circle, though perhaps circle was the wrong metaphor. It was more like a spiral, returning to core values while continuously expanding outward. Thomas had given his sons not just a store, but a foundation upon which they could build whatever they chose, as long as they built it together.